Thank you for the kind introduction. Can you hear me well? Okay, good. I'm delighted to be here. As the MC mentioned, I normally only speak at forums or conferences attended by CEOs or senior executives. But today, one of your schoolmates, Tsukamoto-san, came to me and passionately committed his desire and also GLOBIS uniqueness in terms of developing leaders of tomorrow. And I like that passion of himself and also the school. So that's why I'm here to share and exchange some thoughts with you on how to develop leaders who can lead changes and create new values on the global stages. Today's slides are in Japanese because I was told most of you are Japanese speaking or can speak and read Japanese. I will be speaking English. So if you put Japanese English, it will be too busy on the slide. Huh? The topic today, as the MC said, is how Japan and China can work together to overcome the political crisis and achieve win-win in the global era. The first topic I would like to share with you is what's going to happen in China in the next 10 years. Because this is a question asked by many of the CEOs and senior executives in the last 3 months, I would say. Some of them coming from the US, some from Europe. They come to us from Japan. They ask me this question. So I like to share my view with you and some of the CEOs' view from China and outside. Because you're in Japan, you probably see a lot of the media, a lot of Japanese media and books talking about China collapse and China will have hard landing. Then what is the reality in China? Right? You know who he is, right? And who this gentleman is. This is the Chinese leader, Xi Jinping, and this is the Prime Minister, Li Keqiang. I will talk about a few things in terms of the gap between what is perceived in Japan and what is really happening in China. The first gap is some of the CEOs, the very senior CEO, to come to me and say, Charles, we think that the PM 2.5 pollution in Beijing will drive most of the rich people out of Beijing. And then this will create trouble in the real estate market, driving the price down of the real estate market. And after the real estate price go down, then the Chinese society will have unstable, riots, and therefore economic hard landing and China collapses. Well, let me share some of the views that we Chinese CEOs see the situation. Actually, just 2 months ago, when we had the shadow bankings and local Chinese government debt issue, some of the Chinese CEOs who had dinner with Chinese CEO, who is leading one of the top 10 state-owned company, and also a private CEO company. He's leading one of the top 100 companies in China. So we also discussed, because that was a lot of change. What's going to happen to China? Some of them, their view is that, listen, Americans or Japanese or Europeans are interpreting Chinese problem, the shadow bankings or the local government debts, using the American or Japanese formula. However, the American and Japanese CEOs don't understand the differences, the fundamental differences between the economic system of China versus Japan and the US. For example, in the US, if a local government, say California or Detroit, the government have financial trouble, the federal government, Obama would not, really go all the way to save that local government. That's why California state government is still in insolvency, still in financial trouble. But in China, the central government and the local government, they all belong to one communist party. So it's like local government is a branch office of the central government. If some local government, let's say they have a problem because of debt or issue, they can't repay the money and the local government will collapse, then the central government will help them, will bail them out. So it's unlikely that the similar situation like in the US will happen in China. Another thing is that we have been talking a lot about the Chinese local government's debt issue. But if you look at the numbers, the official number of the Chinese local government debt issue is about 20 to 25% of the Chinese GDP. Our estimate is about 50 to 60% of Chinese GDP. But if you compare Japan and EU, Japan's debt, overall debt, is about 200% of the Japanese GDP. And in EU, European countries, they have about 100%. The debt is about 100% of the national GDP. So if you look at the number, I'm sure some of you attending MBA, you know the numbers. We look at the numbers. We know the situation in China, local government debt, is not as bad as it is perceived from outside. The second gap, I would say, is that China is experiencing historical change, which has never been experienced before. Because after the last 30 years rapid development, Chinese government has realized, especially Li Keqiang, the prime minister, he himself considered himself an economist. He got a PhD in economy. He's trying to adjust Chinese economy from investment-driven to consumption-driven because the investment-driven model is just simply out of gas. There's no way China can keep growing just based on investment. But as you know, in year 2008, when the financial crisis hit, China was brave enough to come up with a 4 trillion treasury rescue measure to help Chinese economy and also the world economy. China was like the hero at that time. But now, 5 years later, we are suffering the consequences because we have got so much money flowing, and it's overheating the economy. So that's why Li Keqiang is trying to adjust the Chinese economy from investment to consumption-driven. This transition is quite challenging. That's why we, in investment, we are looking at the Chinese economic situation transformation very carefully, because when you have change, as you know, there are opportunities. But if we don't read this carefully, we can make huge mistake. If we make the right investment, we can make very good return at this change. So that's why we are extremely cautious right now about which industry and which stage we should get in China. The third thing is, I like to say, one of the major changes that's going to happen in China in the next 10 years is e-business, e-commerce. I'm not sure you know or not. Actually, this year, China will become the largest e-commerce market in the world, surpassing the US. Because Chinese online market has been growing at about 71% in the last 3 years. And US had only grown about 13%. And China actually already number one in terms of in many markets, like automobile market, China is number one, and mobile phone market, China is number one. So China still is going to grow for quite a number of years. my view is in the next few years, it's hard to see a economic hard landing. Of course, after we see the result of August and July Chinese economic index, more people become less worried. But still, there are uncertainties. We will see some adjustments in the next 10 years through the economic development phases, which I will talk. This slide, your school organizer asked me to talk about this topic. It's what is the perception among Chinese, what's the real perception among Chinese towards the Japanese? Because there was a survey done by NPO, or NPO organization, just recently, saying that 90% of the Chinese, 90% of Chinese don't like Japanese, vice versa. But if you look at the number deeper, there's about 50% of the Chinese intellectuals still like Japan. Actually, many of my friends who are CEOs, who are intellectuals, the thinkers, the influential people, they see Japan in a very objective way. So the reason for that is, see, the number of Chinese who understand Japan, the new Japan, is very small compared with the number of Japanese who know China. There was a famous saying among the Chinese academic circle, which says, Chinese population is about 10 times of Japan, right? But the population of Japan who know China is about 10 times of China. In other words, if there's 10 people, Japanese people know China, there are only about 1 Chinese person know Japan. However, I want to point out this. The Japanese who know China, they know the old China, not the new and dynamically changing China. And the same problem for Chinese. Those Chinese know Japan are mostly, about Meiji Restoration, and they don't know the new Japan. So that's why we have a lot of mistakes, misunderstandings between the two countries. Now, let's look at some business. Let's talk about business. How companies can take advantage, tap into the opportunities in China, particularly from Japan. This is a comparison of the GDP per capita between China and Japan. The blue is Japanese, and the red is Chinese. Here you see the Olympic. This is the Olympic in '64, right? Japan took off, and in 2008 we have the Beijing Olympic, right? By the way, I'd like to congratulate all the Japanese for winning the Olympic 2020. This is great news for Japan and for Asia, and the stock market responded favorably today. And because two good news: Chinese economy is growing for 2 consecutive months, and exports growing. Japan is winning the Olympic. That's why the stock market worldwide is responding very favorably. But see, when you look at this data, we need to look at deeper. China, I don't know, how many of you are involved in the Chinese business? Can raise your hand. So it's about half. China, we have Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 4 cities. 1級都市, 2級都市, 3級都市, 4級都市. In terms of the Chinese GDP is about $6,000 US per capita. And for the Tier 1 city, if you compare with Japan, Tier 1 city like Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, it's about, let's see, Japan in the late 70s, I would say. But if you talk about Tier 3, Tier 4 cities, they are like in China, they are like Japan in the 60s, just like Olympic or even before Olympic. So China is not one country. It's hugely diverse, both geographically and also in terms of economic development stages. And another Another interesting thought I'd like to share with you on what's going to happen in the next 10 years in China is I like to quote one of the Japanese thinker and diplomat, ex-diplomat, Mr. Oga. He said recently, Ogura-san, he said in his recent book that there was this Olympic 9 years syndrome. Have you heard about this thing? What he said is he's very experienced, he was diplomat in Korea, Paris, and many different countries, and Vietnam. He's saying for many of the regimes, political regimes, once they have the Olympic, 9 years after the Olympic, the dictatorship-based regime will collapse, will change to a democratic regime. For example, he raised recent example. 1936, we had the Berlin Olympic. And then 9 years later, in 1945, the German Empire, the Hitler Empire collapsed, right? We had a new era. And 1980, we had the Moscow Olympic, right? 9 years later, 1989, the Soviet Union dissolved. In 1988, we had the Seoul Olympic in South Korea. And in 1997, we had the first democratically elected president, Mr. Kim Dae-jung, right? So if you use the same formula, we had a Beijing Olympic 2008. So 9 years later, that's 2017. Something may happen to China. Actually, we have reason to believe that the Chinese senior leadership will have no choice but to make China more democratic. Why? Because as it's a human nature, as Chinese people become more affluent, as Chinese people travel more overseas, because now you go anywhere, New York, Paris is full of Chinese. Chinese people, the way of thinking will change. Actually, in the tier 1 city, in Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, people are very democratic. The government cannot just do things in their own way. Chinese people become very vocal. So this will help. But of course, Chinese democracy may not be the same as American democracy. It will be a Chinese democracy with maybe similar to those like in Singapore. Singapore has elections. Of course, the PAP is very dominant, but they have elections. You know, politicians have to come out and make a speech and win the vote. So we foresee that could be one of the scenarios. So if we have that scenario, Chinese economy will be even more stable. It can capture the good sides of both capitalism and democracy. And of course, with a solid parties making quicker decisions for the good of the country and for Asia and for the world. So, and the next slide I'd like to show is the urbanization. You study MBA, you know, urbanization is a result of economic development. However, if you look at China, I need to translate this one. This is 直辖市 in Chinese, meaning the directly controlled city like Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Chongqing. And this is the eastern area, the coastal area, more developed area. And this is the middle, central area. And this is the western area. They talk about the urbanization ratio. In the like Beijing, Shanghai, it's already 76%. This was 2 years ago, 2011. And the coastal area is 58%. And in the central area is 46%. And the western area is 41%. The goal the Chinese government set is by 2020, we want to have a 60% urbanization ratio for overall China. Actually, the latest data they published is for the 2012, last year's urbanization ratio is 52% of China, for China. But if you look at the data deeper, you know, in China, we have the Huji Koseki system. We have the urban citizens, we have the rural citizen. If you discount those people who are holding the rural citizenship, the registry, living in the city, the urbanization ratio in China overall is only 35%, meaning we still have a lot of room for the new supply of laborers. If you talk about labor economics, that's an inflection point. So there will be constant supply of laborers coming from the tier 3, tier 4, and also some of the rural hukou, the registry citizens living in the city. And that's also a good thing, a positive thing, if we talk about economic development. And the industry, the sectors, if you interpret this data, is what are the sectors that will be good to look at it for investment in the next 10 years? I would say healthcare, because more people come to the city, they need healthcare. And medical, pharmaceutical companies related to that will be good. And second thing is services, consumption services industry. And many actually the Japanese companies coming to China, service industry. I know with the hotel, right? Eric's here, and in the hotel business, there's a lot of opportunities. The railway, the other one's railway. China has a big plan to develop the railway. And until according to the 12th five-year plan, Chinese railway will become like half as it is in the US in terms of penetration ratio in 2015. So there's still a lot of room for development for railway. Okay. And the next topic is what are the typical challenges Japanese company face, and also multinational company. I know some of them, you are not working for Japanese companies. American companies, European companies, they're very similar. What are the typical challenges the multinational companies facing in China, and what are the way to overcome, how to overcome them? Of course, today time is limited. I can only talk some. Before we talk about the principles for success, I'd like to share some of the mistakes. We learn from the mistakes first. All these cases I will be talking here is not from newspapers or from any published materials. It's all from our direct experiences. And Ms. Chiu mentioned our company. We actually are, we invest in high growth companies. We also advise Fortune 500 companies. Our mission is to help. If I just spent 1 minute to introduce our company, our mission is to help Asian companies to become global, more global, and eventually globally admired or respected. And we help them in 3 different ways. First, we act as a strategic investor. We look at long term. We invest in companies which has high potentials, and also the founders have high integrity. Second, we participate in the management. We send our senior executives to our portfolio companies, help them to turn around and to become best in their class. And one of my colleagues, Ms. Takahashi, actually is here, and she's our vice president in charge of Japan-related business. We have American in charge of North America and South America related business, and we have Singaporean who used to be the corporate vice president of Intel Corporation, and he was the also CEO of IBM South Asia. He's looking after our ASEAN business. And we have a European Swiss gentleman looking after our EU business. And the third thing we do is we act as an advisor to those Fortune 500 companies, some of the American, European, or Japanese, to help them how to make it successful in China and Asia. So some of the cases I mentioned here, first mistake some of the companies made is one of the companies who is operating in China has a few $billion revenue. In Japanese, that's US dollar, $billion, a few $billion. In Japanese, that means 13億元, so it's very big, but they're not making profit. You know why? The Chinese tax authority is charging them about $100 million. 100億元. So the CEOs have come to us, ask us to work with the authorities, communicate with the central government, local government to work out a win-win solution so that the company will stay in China and will reduce the tax exposure at the same time. And the second thing we do, the second case I say is electronic company. This is from Japan. The first company is a big joint venture. It's American, Japan, and China joint venture. And the second one is a Japanese company, electronic company. They closed a factory. And it causing 1,000 people losing job. And also the local government official, because of that, he was demoted. Chinese government official, their KPI has been changed recently. Not just driving development, GDP, but also how many jobs you can create. So that was a big damage for the personal career. And the government official was, of course, very unhappy. He disclosed the whole thing to the media that gave the company a lot of trouble. And the third case is a very large company, very large, one of the top company in the world. They had a public crisis. The Chinese authorities, quality control authority, 质监局, say their products have some defect, and they denied. They don't want to admit that they had a problem, and they keep challenging the Chinese authority, and that become a big issue in China. Eventually, the company had to apologize and admit that the problem had defect. So why these things happen? Let's look at some of the differences between Japanese and Chinese CEOs or management. It's, the Japanese CEOs or senior management, they are very fact-based. This is pretty much American, right? When there's a complex problem, we break the complex issues into components and solve the issue one by one, right? That's very familiar to us. And the KPIs for CEOs are mainly profit, revenue, profit, and we also have CSR. But in China, if you want to operate a business in China, there's a different set of skill. First of all, you rely on instinct more than the facts. 康. And the second thing is Chinese CEOs had to strike a balance among many of the contradicting or paradoxical factors, aspects. The 矛盾的な, we have to. And the third thing is, a lot of state-owned companies in China, they don't just do revenue. They don't care too much about the profit. Their main job is to create jobs, create employment, not creating a profit. So that's why you have a lot of issues among these foreign companies, American, European, or Japanese, operating in China, having this kind of challenges. How to handle the different stakeholders. And the other thing is negotiation. In China, negotiation is like a game for Chinese businessmen. Negotiation is a game. We enjoy negotiating. In the business, we negotiate all the time. Anything. If for 1 cent, we negotiate, right? And then when there's any dispute, we tend to use lawsuits. We like Americans. So it's because China is not a homogeneous society like Japan. We're a continent. We have 56 minorities, and you have to put on the paper. Huh? And then here is Chinese businessmen are pretty good negotiators. We use tempo. We use timing. We use settings, almost atmosphere to gain what we really want. But Japanese negotiators, you have the Ishin Denshin, right? You're not supposed to be play hardball, and negotiate hard, and you try to avoid the dispute. You try to have a process, a plan to negotiation. This is no in China. You can't negotiate with Chinese government or Chinese business partner based on the predetermined process. But it's happening in China very often, particularly for Japanese companies, for European companies as well. And American company, a little bit better. Korean companies, pretty good. They know the Chinese mentalities probably better. The other mistakes I like to share with you that more entry level. I don't have time. Maybe we just cut short, because some of the mistakes here sounds very entry level, but unfortunately, most of the Japanese companies cannot do it. Do not follow. One of the mistakes they're doing is a Japanese company, number one of the top IT company in Japan. They're doing direct sales in Japan, but their CEO in China, he said China will be like Japan, maybe 10 years later. That's why he said he will invest in direct sales. He forget about channel, but China is so huge, very different from Japan. You can't do it. And within 2 years, he lost money. He was having a hard time. And the second one is also a consumer product company from Japan. They're number one in Japan, but again, in China, they are only 1% market share. Why? This one of my favorite chart. These principles may sound very basic, but go back to basics. When you want to win in China, you got to go back to the basics. Just compare the differences between Japanese market and China market. You see the size of a circle means the size of a segment in terms of high, mid, low. Right? Japan is largely a middle class society, right? The market. Of course, we need to pay attention to the red arrows, which means showing the changing pattern. Right? For CEOs or business leaders, if you do business, you do your own business, or you want to lead a big company, we need to read the changes, right? Just ahead of time. Japan is changing from a middle class driven society, some of them going to low class, right? Because you have more and more poor people. At the same time, because of the Abenomics, maybe I foresee this will drive some of the middle class become more richer people. Let me ask you a question. How many of you's income have increased this year after Abenomics? Can you raise your hand? Okay. Actually, I'm concerned. Because one of the miracles Japan has created is the defined by Peter Drucker as the social innovation, that Japan after the war created a largely middle class society, which is very stable, right? Many countries want to do that, but they fail to do that. China has the same problem. You look at China, this is China, the low income and the high income. In China, we have 1% of the population controlling 40% of the national wealth. This is the highest in the world, one of the highest. And US is also pretty high, but not as high as China. And once you have that situation, you create an unstable society. And this is the consumer segment is changing. Then the second thing is Japan is largely a middle class, so therefore the Japanese company is good at producing mid-range price but with reasonable high quality products. And Japanese distribution route is also largely, large distributors. But China is very different. China, is two extremes, low and high income, and then we tend to accept low-priced, reasonably good quality products or high-priced, high-quality products. The two extremes. Of course, China is changing. The more low-income segment is moving to the middle class, this is an opportunity for Japanese companies. But many of them are not realizing that. I don't know how to do it. That's why failing some of the very entry-level mistakes. In Japan, Japanese companies are very good, very sophisticated in marketing, in branding. But in China, unfortunately, they're making very entry-level mistakes. And of course, in China, the distribution route is very diversified. You have mama shop, and you have large chain store as well. It's totally different. That's why you cannot use the Japanese model to do it in China, or the American model, or European model to do it in China. You got to really go deep to understand what's really happening in China. And the other one is decision-making process between China and Japan. Japan is very process-driven PDCA. China is like goal, result-driven. China is like, in order to reach the goal, if A doesn't work, I go B, or B doesn't go, I go C. So that's why Chinese company move very fast. I've said the things move at a speed in China like 4 times of in Japan. If you make a decision in China 6 months, that equal 2 years in Japan. So that's why things moving very fast in China. We need to make quick decisions as business leaders. And the other thing is I think time is limited, right? How much time I have? Okay, so I will talk a little bit. This one is, Japanese companies is very good in terms of being long-term in Japan, but in China they do the opposite. One thing is they try, you can see Japanese company, many of them, they try the project and it's not successful, they don't see immediate result, they will drop it and go to the next one. Or they change the China head every 2 to 3 years. There's no continuity. The good company in China will have to go deep, find out what's really happening, and develop a strategy and stick to it, and create short-term wins. Once you create like short-term wins, you can show the result to employees and then stick to it at least for 5 years. That's what China market is. We have a 5-year plan. I used to be working with the central government responsible for industry policies. We always do the 5-year plan. And now we are under the 5th year plan, 5-year plan. So you have to do that. How can Japanese companies overcome the challenges in China is, number one, that you got to make sure that the headquarter team and local China operation work together as one team, not creating the division between headquarters and the China operation. And many Japanese companies have the problem, even European company, American company, similar. But Japanese companies change slower than the European company, American company. And the other thing is you need to do something, identify a project which has national impact, not just in Japanese do kotsukotsu. China is not marketed. You can win by doing kotsukotsu. You have to identify project strategy which has enough impact in the Chinese society. Then you can get attention. Of course, the strategic thinking, and also don't get emotionally with things. Don't just rely on the personal connections. Chinese or Japanese executives, we tend to rely too much on the personal connections rather than strategic thinking. That's the things we need to strike a balance. Strategic thinking and cool-headed judgment plus networking and a connection. Then it will make a good decision in the current stage of development. And there's many rules and principles. As time limited, I can't share, but them all. You can read this book. The MSC also mentioned, and we have actually received many positive feedback from CEOs of large companies, small companies, medium-sized companies. But the last topic I'd like to talk a little bit is how China and Japan can overcome the political crisis. And as all the companies operating in China, European company, Japanese company, you all have to be aware of the political risk. I give you an example, not just Japanese company. The French supermarket, Carrefour, when the French Prime Minister met Dalai Lama, the Chinese consumer boycott the French supermarket for a whole week with 30 trucks going to the parking lot, blocking the whole supermarket. And of course, Carrefour suffered a huge loss. But the Japanese companies, because of the historical reason between China and Japan, you have to pay more attention to this Japan bashings or issues. Unfortunately, Japanese companies have a very, I would say, it's not a sophisticated functions who deal with this kind of crisis. And then one of the reasons for Japanese companies not sophisticated is because the China operation units for Japanese companies tends to be sales units or manufacturing units. They don't have a sophisticated corporate function that deal with crisis or corporate communications. And the other thing is, although many of the Japanese companies saying they are the group only, they work as a group, but they are actually very fragmented. So headquarters not operation and local operation not working with each other. And the other thing is the CEO. Many of the Japanese CEOs, they see China market is very important, but very few of them go to China often. And in the China-Japan CEO Forum, I say, I always remind them, urge the CEOs to go to China at least once a quarter. And the second thing is also the China operation head of Japanese companies are afraid to telling the Japanese headquarters what's really going on in Japan because they are afraid of being accused to find excuses for the low performance in China. Japanese businessmen have this bidoku, right? Have this not trying to find excuse. Just I just supposed to work hard. This thing's wrong. It's not my problem. I cannot find excuses, and so that's why you have this problem. The other thing is the headquarters in Japan rely on too much of the Chuokzi, China expert, but many of the Chuokzi knowledge are outdated. Their knowledge is the 80s or 90s, not really in the most recent. And this is some good company. We work with European company. They are L'Oreal, the #1 in cosmetics in China, way ahead of Shiseido, way ahead of Kanebo. They have this one of the strategic CSR management principles. They identify the social pulses. I would say that they identify the hot topic in China, the political, social topics, and they make a strategy and they stick to it 5 years and they do it in a very strategic way. That's why they've been very successful and they have very clear stakeholder strategy involving the six stakeholders: the government, the media, the consumer, the employees, the business partners, the NGO groups. They have very clear strategy, and also public crisis. How do you handle? Many Japanese companies will experience more and more public crisis. How do you handle this? I have a simple formula: why, who, what, when. It's when things happen, when crises happen, you got to understand what is the root cause. Who is doing this to you? Is this your consumer doing this? Is the government doing this? Is the media doing this? Identify the root cause, and then who? You have to identify the person who has influences in China, not yourself telling the Chinese media, oh, we didn't do this, this is wrong. China is a very low trust society. Chinese consumers don't trust what you say. They trust the people who have authorities and influences in China, some of the government people or leaders. So you identify some people who have influence in China and who share the same interests with you. I can't give examples because time's up. And also when, I should put a when, it should be how, but the purpose I put a when is because timing for this kind of crisis, many Japanese companies say, oh, We have no comments. We have no comments. And then we're now in the process to confirm the issue. But the more Chinese people's patience level is very low, the longer you wait, the worse the situation will be in China. So that's why as business leaders in China or in many of the emerging countries, you have to figure out. That's why I say instincts is very important. You got to smell, like a sniff. What's really going on? Who is doing this to you, right? Find your buddy and do it quickly. Then you can put the fires off quickly. Yeah, how do you minimize, particularly for Japanese company, how do you minimize the country risk in China? There are many different ways to minimize country risk. If time is limited, I can just share some. One is you got to develop a clear corporate identity. See, China is like a jungle. If you don't have a clear identity or personality, nobody recognizes you. Who are you? You're just here make money, or you're here committed to China. The Chinese people are very smart. They can smell you. If you're just here talking about business, if you're making money, you don't talk about you don't try to understand what Chinese culture, Chinese society need, and they won't trust you. And when you have a problem, crisis, nobody will help you. You won't have friends to help you. Okay, and that's why you have to have a sophisticated stakeholder policies involving all the stakeholders, the government, the media, the consumer, the NGO, Dangdai, and your employees, right, your business partner. And also, you need to develop the trust among the local employees, the Chinese employees. And some of them can help you to solve problems. Oh, the other thing is talk about employees. We know, when we do business, people, you have strategy, you have the right strategy, you have the right talent and right people. And many of the CEOs in China come to me, say, Charles, it's very hard to attract top talents in China. How do you guys do it? We say, well, we have a saying in China. It's called 栽下梧桐树，自有凤凰来. Meaning, you plant a beautiful tree, then you will attract the beautiful birds to you. So it's quite philosophical. And because in China, also organization, because in China, the loyalty of employees is towards the business leader, the CEO, the founder, not towards the company, the organization. In Japan, it's very much the loyalty is towards the organization, right? Even though the leader is not attractive, employees will still come to work for the Japanese organization, large companies. But in China, it's different. If the leader, the founder, are not attractive leaders, it's hard for you to attract top talents. That's why for CEOs and business leaders in doing business in China, you have to have personal acumen, a personal character, and also business acumen at the same time. The other thing is the career development cycles in China is very short. Normally, if this is multinational in Japan or in the US, right, Europe, it takes about 25 years for entry-level employee to move to the executive level, right? It's pretty normal. So, but in China, 15 years. I like to use example. Miss Christine Takahashi, she's our corporate VP, and she's very young. I mean, she's very senior in our company. She used to be one of the working for one of the top Japanese IT companies as the and the top solution consultant for 3 consecutive years. And she won the President Award. She was sent to China to develop the China market. And she's very, amazing. She had, in a very short time, she developed 1,000 companies. She helped clients. And she was very young. She was the youngest expat sent by these Japanese IT companies to China. And she helped Dongfeng Nissan, Tofu Nissan, and First Auto Toyota, Ichiki Toyota, the CEOs of both sides, to solve the problem when the first early stage of their joint venture. So later on, she joined one of the American IT consulting company as the head of strategic investment and M&A for Greater China and Asia. And a few years ago, she also got her executive MBA at one of the China top business school, and she joined us a few years ago. And we have other American gentleman who's got a PhD from MIT, and who knows China and Japan very well, speaks English, speaks Chinese and Japanese very well. And he's helping some of the Chinese state-owned companies to solve their problem in North America and South America. And the other issue I'd like to highlight is for Chinese companies to promote the Chinese executive. Normally, when an employee joins your company, they tend to leave at about 2 years and 2 years and a half. There's a gap. For a multinational company or for a Japanese company, they tend to promote that employees after 3 years, or 2.5 or 3 years. Because of that few months gap, you lose your talents. It happens many times in China. So then how to become attractive and respected leaders? Of course, there are many aspects. I understand GLOBIS is an institute which aspires to be the one to develop young leaders for the future. And I'd like to share maybe 3 elements that I personally feel important. One is we need to have a global vision, that we need to think big. And a global mindset, that means we need to predict troubles before it happens in the global market and create business by integrating, by reading, by the changing patterns, not just waiting for things to happen. And the second thing is personal character. Personal character is so important. I said in China, leaders' personal characters and competencies are very crucial. What kind of organization you develop. Its personal character needs to be built on both hard and soft aspects. The hard, soft is easy to understand, right? You understand, you know how to develop strategy, how to read the financial statement, you know how to do the numbers, you know how to control the inventory, you know how to do sales marketing. But the soft aspect are often hard. What are the soft aspects? Cultural understanding, philosophical understanding of the market you operate, and also religion understanding. I know many of the Japanese companies now are going to ASEAN, and ASEAN is a very diversified region. You have Muslim, right? You have Christian, you have Hindu, you have Buddhism. So you have all different kind of religions, culture. So we have to understand that and show genuine interest in local culture and earn the respect. And the last, we have to be interested in ourselves. We need to have our personal hobbies, sports, music, and so that we are an attractive person, an interesting person to talk to work with. Last, just a few slides, I think, just conclude. It's one of the, I think, the major reason that China and Japan are fighting now over a small island, rocks, is because China and Japan lacked world-class solution to solve the current political issue. As leaders on both sides focus too narrowly on their own country's interests rather than looking at the big picture, thinking out of the China-Japan box and looking at the interests of Asia, looking at the interests of the world, then we can find, this problem will be resolved. And many people say 21st century is Asia century, but if China and Japan keep fighting like this, nobody will believe 21st century is Asia century, because the 2 largest countries in Asia keep fighting and don't trust each other, right? And how can you make the Asian culture or companies or leaders be respected? Actually, besides business, we also do social contribution activities, like NPO activities. One of the activities we do is the China-Japan CEO Forum. We founded that 4 years ago. We gather friends from most of them CEOs, chairmen of leading countries, leading companies in Asia, from Japan, about 100 of them. We gather together once a year. We share wisdom on how to build long-lasting companies, how to build world-class companies. Because in China, average life of Chinese business is about 3.5 years. Private companies, very, very short life. And in Japan, you have 20,000 companies which has got more than 100 years history. So Chinese CEOs, entrepreneurs can learn from Japanese counterparts. At the same time, China has created huge amount of wealth. And China, not only wealth, China has created huge amount of IPs. Now China is #1 in the world in terms of IP registration. And Japan used to be the most advanced technology country. Now China, Huawei, Lenovo, all number Panasonic, in terms of numbers of IPs applied, registered worldwide. So that's why Japanese CEOs, counterpart also need to learn from Japan, from China. Many of all these people are a good friend of mine. You can see Mikitani-san from Rakuten, Hasegawa-san from Takeda, and Ninami-san, all these good friend of Harvard's, and also Chinese, the Qingdao Beer chairman, CEO, and TCL. This is all the top #1 in the respective industry, and we all have the same aspiration that to make Asian companies better understood and more respected eventually. And after the several years of CEO forum, we got the request from many of the CEOs from China and Japan. One of the top challenges of Chinese CEOs and Japanese CEOs is to develop next generation CEOs who can lead changes on the global stages. So that's why we founded the World Leader Center. The goal is to develop next generation leaders who can become CEOs of the companies a few years later. So there's a smaller group. I understand GLOBIS, the vision is to develop young leaders and leaders with personal conviction, aspirations to change the world and make the society better. And I wish you good luck and all the success. Thank you very much.